Rufo here, and I am so pleased today to introduce you to a former classmate and colleague of mine, Jonathan Alderson. Jonathan specializes in working with children with autism and currently runs a consulting business out of southwestern Ontario. Jonathan's completion of a 3-year intensive certification training at the Autism Treatment Center of America strongly influenced his current focus on a humanistic approach to autism treatment. Jonathan has worked in the Sunrise program in Massachusetts as an administrator and a senior family trainer. He additionally has spent time in London, where he supported families from the United Kingdom, Ireland, Holland, and Spain. Jonathan has instructed more than 3,000 families and students with disabilities around the world. Jonathan has developed an integrated model to support students with autism called the Intensive Multi-Treatment Intervention. This holistic approach views the child with autism as an individual first and does not subscribe to a one-size-fits-all model. Jonathan has shared his knowledge of autism at numerous training events and seminars. He is also author of the book, Challenging the Myths of Autism, where he advocates for rethinking how we traditionally conceive autism. All right. Hi, everyone. I am excited to be here today with my colleague, Jonathan Alderson. And Jonathan and I reconnected after almost 20 years, I think, Jonathan, when we were students and classmates together at Harvard University Graduate School of Education. And the reason that I reached out to Jonathan is because I really appreciated and valued his approach to working with students with autism. And Jonathan has a really humanistic approach and really looking at students individually and trying to develop those positive relationships. So I'm really excited about our talk today. So welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you, Jenna. Thanks for inviting me. And it has been really wonderful to reconnect with you. And I'm also looking forward to a conversation. We had a lovely one a couple weeks ago. We just seemed to share a lot of ideas together. And also, I think it's good to challenge each other as well to continue to grow and open up.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Jonathan, I had mentioned that I really value your approach to working with kids with autism in that while you certainly use principles of behavior modification and things like that, you really approach it from a relational standpoint and working with them in a humanistic way. So maybe you could just start out by telling us a little bit about your approach.
Yeah. So first of all, I had begun my journey after undergrad in developmental psychology, went to a place in Massachusetts, an autism treatment center where I did about 4 years of training. And while I was there, I learned deeply about connecting with children and the parents as a form of therapeutic, what we call the therapeutic alliance, essentially. You could think about it as an educator alliance, but there's so much research that tells us about the importance of having a good relationship with your student. I mean, it sounds so obvious, it sounds so obvious, and yet there's not always a focus on the relationship to the student. We often, as teachers, educators, and even parents, I think we focus on the curriculum or the goal, whether it's a behavioral goal, like I have to get my child to brush his teeth. But in that ambition, it may be an uncomfortable relationship as I try and, struggle to get that toothbrush in my child's mouth. So what I teach parents, for example, and teachers is if we pause for a moment and before we think about the goal of brushing your teeth or teaching mathematics, could we think about how I'm interacting with this student or my child? And not only think about that, but there could be skills that can be acquired that a teacher could learn, an educator could learn, a therapist, a behavior therapist, a speech therapist could learn, parents, even though with your very own child, that there are skills and techniques that you could learn of how to build a rapport that within which a child feels that they trust you, that they're excited to learn from you, they're motivated to learn, they're receptive. We talk about receptivity. So that's really where I began that journey and learning about that over the next 20 years, got to had the opportunity to practice with hundreds of different children and families and situations in schools, and saw over and over and over and over again that when a teacher sits down and says, hey, I've got this student, really, I care for the student, I want so much for the student, but it's such a struggle, the behavioral issues, what can I do about him, calling out in class, let's say. And instead of going to a behavioral strategy right away, we get there. First, we say, okay, can I just observe a little bit, or could you tell me a little bit about how you relate to this child? What's the relationship dynamic? And 100% of the time, there's something that we could teach that teacher, a tip or strategy around relating that can often resolve most, if not all, of the behavioral problems. So we don't have to get into reinforcements and punishments and that kind of stuff.
Right. And like you said, I think it seems so obvious that, sure, of course, we need a good relationship with students. But in your book, so Jonathan's an author, and I have his book right here, Challenging the Myths of Autism. So one of the things that you noted in the book was that this myth that students with autism don't display affection. So I wonder, and maybe in your experience, do you feel like that's a barrier sometimes when we're working with kids, because we have these ideas of what they may or may not be able to do, or the relationships that they might be able to form?
Absolutely, 100%. And I think, Jen, in your work in schools and classrooms as well, I'm sure you come up against what I call myths, we might call stereotypes, negative stereotypes, right? About different students with Down syndrome, students with different kinds of learning challenges or learning differences. And certainly with autism, there are a whole number of commonly held beliefs about these children, about this population, about adults with autism as well. Beliefs that we get from the media, from movies like Rain Man and TV shows like The Good Doctor. And it's terrific. It's really, really good news that people with autism are being portrayed in the media more and more, but they're often portrayed with stereotypes.
Right, absolutely. So I think too, like you had mentioned, really looking at a student from, not what we have these preconceived ideas of, okay, a student needs to act this way or behave a certain way in school, but really just taking a step back and saying, okay, what might really be at the root of this? And that's what I really love about your approach.
Yeah, right on. So there's a little tagline that sticks in my mind, which is different, not defective, or different, not defunct. And if you think about almost any relationship, really, Jenna, I mean, for your viewers listening or watching, think about a relationship in your life. Maybe someone that's close, a spouse, could be a child, and if they like something different than you, or a different way, let's say you're having a barbecue and they want ketchup on their hot dog and you want mustard, it wouldn't occur to you, I hope it wouldn't occur to you, that you think, oh my word, we have to have a hot dog intervention here.
Right.
My husband wants mustard. Now, sometimes we are surprised at what people like,
Right.
that's different from us, and we say, what? You like peanut butter on your hot dog? Kind of thing. I think there's a commercial I saw recently where a child is doing that, and the mother says, well, where did you learn that? And the child sort of looks at the mom and says, what? Don't you do that? In other words, it was reversed. The child is sort of looking at the adult saying, don't you guys put peanut butter in your hot dog? It's awesome.
Yeah.
I think it was a peanut butter commercial. But so sometimes we are surprised at differences, but you're right. We don't think, my word, we need to do sort of a behavioral intervention, or you need to take a course to learn how to enjoy ketchup on your hot dog. When you have, I think adults tend to do that, first of all, to children more often. We do think, oh, you don't like this or you don't like that. Well, you need to. We don't accept differences as much in children. But definitely with children with autism, and especially nonverbal children with autism, we tend to impose and superimpose our beliefs, our needs, our preferences on the child, I think largely because we can't ask them, or we haven't figured out how to ask them. And so in the absence, at a barbecue, I could turn to my spouse or my friend and say, hey, the hot dogs are almost done. What would you like on it?
Mhm.
And they can tell me. And so if I can't do that, or I haven't figured out how to get that communication, have that communication with someone with autism who's nonverbal, I'm going to assume what I like. So let's say I put ketchup on this child's hot dog, they might take it and then throw it away. And what I make up and conclude is, oh, that's inappropriate behavior. He has to learn how to keep that hot dog in on his plate, or to put it in the garbage, not on the floor. And it might not occur to me, he doesn't want ketchup on his hot dog. And
Right.
maybe my spouse might throw the hot dog at me too if I put ketchup on it. So what do we do about that, though? I think there's two things, and that you're sort of alluding to, and one is to learn, and this is a skill, to learn to step back from or pause our assumptions that we
Mhm.
impose on people. And that's a skill. I think we can do it again with our spouses, with our neighbors, certainly with children who have different communication styles and needs. I think we have to step back or suspend our judgments, our beliefs, our opinions, and really invest in time to find out from the other person what it is that they like. And then the second thing, and that's a journey,
Mhm.
the second, I think, skill is to open our minds up to the reality, the truth that people like different things. Some people like mustard and some people like ketchup, and your child may want to be picked up and he may not want to be picked up.
Right.
And your daughter may want to color on paper, and she might not. She might want to color on cardboard boxes. To be open to those differences is critical as an educator, as a parent.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of leads me into your take on what we have previously called self-stimulatory behaviors, or STIMs. And as a former autistic support teacher myself, I know that there was always a lot of concern over, flapping or spinning and all of that movement. So, if you could just share with us a little bit about how you've reframed looking at those behaviors, and even some of the strategies that you have engaged in, like joining and imitating to support the growth of students.
Yeah, Jenna, in your work, what is a repetitious behavior that you remember seeing maybe in one of the students that you had to kind of deal with?
Mhm. I think I had one student who, when he was kind of jazzed up, would just run around the room. So, kind of running in circles. And he needed that movement, proprioceptive input to get all that energy out.
Mm-hmm. Wow, I'm aware as you describe that, even the language you use is different from what we often hear, and it's more pro, I'm going to say, as opposed to anti
Mhm.
repetitious behavior. So you said when he gets jazzed up, so you're attributing a reason to it.
Right.
And if we just pause there, uh, back in the 40s and 50s, there was a very well-known professor emeritus at UCLA named Ivar Lovaas, who was really the grandfather of bringing applied behavioral analysis, a science of behavior, to the field of autism and even to education more broadly. He's a very important figure in this. And he wrote some seminal papers that have influenced the field to this day. And one set of papers and view that he held was that repetitious ritualized behaviors don't serve a function, that they're non-functional. In fact, he would say that they're dysfunctional. In other words, that they might get in the way of typical function. So if we just step back for a moment, one of the three primary areas of diagnosis or key diagnostics for the diagnosis of autism one of them is repetitious and ritualized behaviors, and that's what we're talking about. So that could be a behavior that a child or adult with autism does over and over and over and over again for periods of time, maybe for 5-10 minutes, often throughout the day, at different times. So it could be just rocking back and forth. Jen, as you said, circuiting, going around in a circle. I've worked with children who line objects up. So if you take them out to a restaurant, they might take your fork and dad's knife and the napkin holder and the salt shaker and the pepper shaker and the ketchup and then something else that they see and line them all up. And it's not just that they do that once, but that would be, again, a pattern that they might do in every restaurant that you ever go to over and over. So how do you deal with that is the big question for educators and parents. And where we start in my approach, which comes back to the very first thing you said of a humanistic approach, is we start with our attitude. We start with what we believe. What's the belief we hold about that? And in your description, you said, this little guy was jazzed up, and you said he needed to do it. He needed to burn off, So again, you're attributing that, and so your belief with that, if you as an educator believe that this child needs to do that for some reason that's beneficial to run off steam, then of course you might allow him to do it or find a way for him to do it that works in the classroom. If, on the other hand, I'm in the behavioral Lovas camp, if you will, and I'm believing that it's non-functional, doesn't serve a purpose, and is disruptive, then I'm going to move in ways to stop the child from running in a circle, right, believing that it's not helpful for him. So it's key not just to jump to what do we do, but the first set of questions that I use in working with educators and parents is not what do we do, but what do we think? What do we believe about it? Because that determines what I do. So again, coming back to our attitude is a key piece. I would suggest to you today that you could begin, you'll never lose. It's always a good thing to start with the belief that it has a function, that there's a purpose for it. Just begin there, because what that does is that opens your eyes and your ears and your mind to looking for the possibility. But for a child who's rocking back and forth or flapping their hands, the reason might not be obvious to the parent. So where do we start in this program is we start with the belief that it does have a purpose, whether that's physiological, emotional, cognitive, sensory. And what we do is we begin to observe the child to try and investigate and find out, well, what purpose could that serve? One way that we try and figure out and determine what purpose might it serve is we actually will do the behavior with the child, alongside the child. So I'll give you just a quick example, very, very quick. I was working with a child who was tapping his pen on his finger over and over and over and over and over again. And you would think to yourself, well, what purpose could that serve? Clearly, it's getting in his way of learning, reading, and writing. So I had our staff team, our therapists, do it with him. So they sat there and tapped it. And in one of the meetings following at the end of the week, when I was debriefing with the staff, hey, so what did you learn? So that was the question. It's a bit of a reconnaissance mission and intelligence, like, let's go do it and come back and we'll talk about what we learned. And it was amazing. It was so amazing that each of the people had a different experience. One person said, wow, I started to hear auditorily, depending on where you tapped on the pen, it made a different sound. And I think that he was doing this kind of auditory, like, rhythm thing. And another person said, oh, I didn't get that. For me, I was looking at the pen as it went up and down, and it made a shadow. So as the pen went further away from the fingertip, the shadow got smaller, and as it came closer, it got bigger. And they sort of the staff described how they kind of got lost in the shadow, and they thought it was very cool. And each person had a different experience. But what was amazing, we don't know exactly what the child is getting, but what was amazing is these four educators, each started to see a meaning and a purpose and an insight into the behavior. So they accepted it more. And we believe that helped them to establish more of a trust and a rapport with that student.
Right, absolutely. So approaching it from more of a relational interaction and more of a caring way instead of a seeking to control it. And I certainly believe, as you do, that all behavior is communication and that there's always a reason why. We might not know it yet, but there's certainly a reason why. And that's our job as educators, is to uncover that so that we can reach the child.
Yeah, I think it's so important for us to do that, because there are often behaviors that most of us wouldn't engage in typically. I can't remember when I last flapped my hands.
Mhm.
Maybe when I was a little infant, a younger person, and so I don't have a point of reference
Right.
to understand that or to have any insight into it. So that's why I encourage a teacher or an adult or therapist and say, well, why don't you try it? Why don't you
Mhm.
try it? Try doing it and get yourself a point of reference and see what that might feel like. And someone might say, wow, this feels kind of good, actually, like shaking out my arm. And someone might say it's kind of meditative, and someone else might say it's calming, and someone else might say, whatever. And that kind of does, it's not that you have to get it right, it's that you get a point of reference, so that the unknown, the thing that we sort of push against, starts to become a bit familiar. And again, there's a point of reference for which we can engage with this other human, and start to have some kind of relationship and communication.
Great. Yeah. So, Jonathan, a lot of the people that I work with or who read my blog or watch these videos are really interested in having their children included in general ed, or their teachers who are looking for more effective ways to include students with disabilities. So, what suggestions would you have for teachers who have students with autism in their class? And of course, we know that there's a huge spectrum, and that every child is going to be different. We need to approach it slightly differently. And I think that's really key in your approach. But overall, just in terms of supporting children with autism in inclusive settings, what advice would you have?
Hmm. It's a big question, and you hit on a really, really, really important note. All children are different, and that's not just only children with autism, students with autism, because it's a spectrum. We know that there's a really broad spectrum. You and I would agree that really every student is individual. With that said, there are three top tips, if you will, that I would say that are common
Great.
in the consultation that I do with school boards, and individual teachers, that can help, by the way, any student.
Mhm.
So, as we say in special ed, special education is good education.
Right.
So,
Definitely.
but the number one, the low hanging fruit, the number one thing is to consider the environment.
Mhm.
Look at the physical environment. I'll give you just a very quick example. I was brought into a school with a young to support a teacher of a 7-year-old, a young girl
Mhm.
with autism. She's quite verbal and high functioning, but the teacher said, Jonathan, she works in her desk very well. She does independent working, but every single time we do a sort of a come on the carpet circle time kind of thing for show and tell, whatever it is, I have her sit right beside me because she's so distracted there. I don't know why she gets so distracted. And I want to know how I can, help her focus. So I came into the classroom, I observed a little bit, and here's what was happening. Where the carpet was and where they sat on the floor was also right behind where the teacher sat, was the largest bookshelf in the class. And this little girl loved books. That was one of her things. And so the teacher kind of had figured that out already. And that's why the teacher had her sit right beside the teacher. But that was also the closest point to the books, because the books were
Sure.
the teacher. So here's what it was our solution. I said, would you ask the school if you could just staple a little piece of cloth, like a curtain, along the bookshelf, just so that visually she doesn't see it and it's not as accessible. Because I knew, I'd worked with this student before. I knew that sort of out of sight, out of mind for her.
Yep.
She wasn't a student that would go digging behind the curtain. So the teacher said, oh, I don't have to ask the school for that. I could just staple that up
Yeah.
really quickly here. Great. So she did it. And I got an email literally a couple of days later that said, Jonathan, Unbelievable. She totally is focused in circle time. She's focused during the reading. She's not looking at the books because they're literally visually out of sight. So
Yep.
that's a quick example of a real easy solve in the environment. And there's
Yeah, and Jonathan, I love that example because it reminds me of what I like to call the common sense approach to inclusion. Sometimes we think that all of these strategies that we have to implement are really complicated and we have to come up with this behavior plan, when a lot of times the answer is really right in front of us. And I remember working with a team once, and the teacher said, "Well, I'm afraid he's going to get the scissors." And so I said, "Well, then put them away." That sometimes the where you start is pretty obvious, but when you're in it, it might not feel so obvious. But really just looking at that environment and how can we change the environment so that the student is really being more successful rather than trying to control the student's behavior.
100%. I hope you write that down and put it on a poster somewhere, right? What else could we control before we think about controlling the
Yes.
student? Could we control the lighting? Could we control our own behavior as adults? And maybe the last thing we need to consider is how do we control and change the child's
Yeah.
behavior? Really appreciate what you said. Yeah. Can I just add, by the way, in that example, I know you'll appreciate this, Jenna, is I also heard from the teacher in that email, by the way, Jonathan, all of the other students, many of the other students were also more focused.
Right.
So that modification to the environment, that change of what's the backdrop? What's the backdrop behind me as a
Mhm.
teacher? And if I have the alphabet along this wall, and A is for apple and B is for bee,
Yeah.
and the kids are looking at that. And then I have, the weather posters here, and then I have who's in trouble and who gets recess, kids list, and I have all these different things here. And I look out at my class, and only half of them are focused. And one of
Yeah.
the answers is, hey, it's not just the child with autism or special needs or ADHD that's not focused because it's so busy behind you.
Yeah.
But when you clear that up, you might find that most of the rest of the class also can focus on you. And this
Mhm.
is what's exciting to me
Right.
about this work is it's not is how it helps everybody. I think that you said it's so obvious putting the scissors away, but sometimes you don't see it because you're there. I think that one of the most helpful, one of the best investments a teacher, a school, or school board could make is to have a consultant like yourself, like myself, come into a classroom, into a school, and spend literally 30 minutes or less, sometimes that's all it takes, and just to observe, just literally to
Right.
have a fresh pair of eyes, but an educated specialist pair of eyes, look and point out this and this, tweak, and things go smoother. And that extra professional set of eyes, wow, can make a year of school's worth of difference.
Yeah, definitely. Now, you had shared that there are three things, and we talked about one, and then I jumped in. So I don't want you to forget two and three. So,
Okay, yes, I will share them quickly. So one is the environment.
mhm.
Uh, the second one is what we've talked about already, is relationship.
Yep.
And similar to the conversation we were just having, an issue comes up and we often go to the what do I do to reinforce the new behavior, or diminish the other behavior, or this kind of stuff, change the behavior. And so, but the easy tip that's applicable without knowing a specific behavior today, that's generalized, is I will say to a teacher in particular, also to a parent, is how much time do you have in your teaching schedule to invest in relationship with this particular student? Okay, so this is how much time do you have in your schedule? Now, I often, will get a kind of the squint or a look or a tilted head, sort of, what are you talking about? You
Yeah.
know that I'm teaching with 25 kids. I have no time to have a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
So I can put that in. But so we have discussions that are sometimes hard discussions around scheduling and time availability and this kind of stuff. Here's the good news is, if you're able to take 3 minutes each day, every day, put it in your schedule. It might be as you first set up everyone else to start reading, and you take 3 minutes. And you might sit and do some reading with your own book alongside this student. If you can do that, if you can take 3 minutes each day over a month period of time, you've invested daily in this one thing. You've invested in giving that student or the child, if it's your own child, an experience of you that doesn't include demands or corrections or anything like that.
Right.
So, in other words, most of our interactions with a student as a teacher is a correction or a demand. Hey, take out your book. Don't touch Bill. Don't touch Jessica. Sit down. Come over
Sure.
here. Do that. And so that becomes my relationship with you. But if you come over and just color beside me and you don't place any demands, and you might just say, hello, how are you? Or that's a nice picture, and then you leave, then I start to have a different experience of you. And that investment of 3 minutes of coloring or 2 minutes of reading a book will start to create a base of relationship, of trust, of compliance, of receptivity that will make the rest of your day and all of those times when you have to say, hey, Billy, can you turn around, face the front, or can you come on over here? The compliance goes way up. The receptivity goes way up just from that investment. So that's the second point, is invest in the relationship. Easy, but we got to figure out how to do it.
Mhm.
And then number three, so simple, so easy to do. This is free. You can do it without training, often overlooked, not hard to do, and that is positive reinforcement. Again, low hanging fruit, super easy, doesn't take any explanation. It's basically make sure about twice an hour through the day that you give this child a positive reinforcement. But specifically, and this is the tip, specifically positive reinforcement about studentship. So
Tell me
what I
more
mean by
about that.
that is, so studentship is all of those skills that many other neurotypical, what we often say, are other children come to school kind of with. So sitting and facing forward,
Right.
or listening to instructions, following instructions, or being focused, quiet, and doing work, et cetera, et cetera. So all the skills that you use to be a student. With a lot of the children I work with, we actually have to teach not only the math and the reading and the spelling and all the curriculum, but we have to teach studentship skills, how to learn, how to stay kind of still in your desk, how to open a book and all that kind of stuff. So instead of catching a child when they're not doing that and saying, hey, turn around, I teach students or teachers to catch the child when they are turned around.
Yep.
So to look for when it is happening, not when it's not. And so if you can get on a schedule every day, as I said, 2 positive reinforcements of studentship every hour. And so you would be walking along and you see the child with ADHD, attention deficit disorder, who's often bouncing their body, and you catch them for the 5 minutes they're not in the day. And you make a point to go up to them and say, hey, Jacob, your body is so calm right now. Way to go. That's it. And then in 30 minutes from now, hey, Jacob, I noticed that you put the crayons and the scissors and the scotch tape back in the bin, like we've been talking about. I'm so proud of you. Way to go, buddy. You're remembering really well today. And then 30 minutes later, Jacob, I want to tell you that today I've seen you twice be a really good friend to your students in the class. And that makes me so happy to see you be a good friend. I bet that feels good for you too. And then 30 minutes later and 30 minutes later. And so that positive reinforcement is, again, it's a free resource. You don't have to get training on it. And if you do it, it makes a massive difference. Those 3 things: environment, invest in rapport, and then positive reinforcement transforms a classroom.
This is great. Thank you so much, Jonathan. I always have enjoyed speaking with you. I'm glad we had the chance to reconnect. And before we finish, I did just want to share some ideas that you and I had that maybe some of our viewers or listeners are potentially interested in. So in Jonathan's role as a consultant, he works a lot with individual families and looking at student mapping. And in my role, I look more at systems and how can we kind of address any systemic barriers. So Jonathan and I had thought, wow, wouldn't it be great if we're able to work with schools where they might be having a challenge with a particular student, maybe a student with autism, but maybe not. It could be another disability, where we look at a map for that student, and then we look at a map for that classroom, and even bigger for that school. Because I think what we've found, and what I found certainly in my career, is sometimes it's that one kid, right? So it takes one kid and an intervention with that student and really rethinking things because of that one child to make things better for everyone else. So Jonathan and I are teaming up, and we are looking to partner with any school districts or families that perhaps are experiencing some challenges, and working with them to develop a student map and then a system map. So if that's something that anyone listening or watching is interested in, you can go onto my website, www.jennarufo.com/services, and we will have something posted there about how you can contact us to make that happen. So Jonathan, anything that you wanted to, parting words or things to wrap up before we finish today?
Hey, just a couple of very quick things. One, the book Challenging the Myths of Autism is available if people want it on Amazon, and in lots of places you can find that. And I say that just because I do think if you have a student or a child with autism, and if any of these ideas kind of open up some thinking, you'll find the book a great resource. I would just say, thank you, Janet, for having me here today and having this discussion. These conversations don't have to be serious. They don't have to be tough. They don't have to be uncomfortable. But asking questions and being creative and coming together as a team to find positive solutions can actually feel really, really good and empowering. And that's what Jenny, you and I would really like to offer to an individual family or a classroom, a school board. We'd be very excited and looking forward to doing that kind of work with someone that would like that. So yeah.
Great. Well, thank you. Thanks everyone for joining me today. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe on my YouTube channel. And if you never want to miss an update, head on over to my website at www.jennarufo.com/contact to get the latest videos, blogs, offerings, resources, and more.